Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Richmond Raceway, lying within the Commonwealth of Virginia, a track that is basically known for managing your tires, tire wear out, and basically having the right track position in a fast car to win the race. We saw a lot of that in the summer heat yesterday, and one driver came from deep in the field all the way to the front to get an old name as far as one of the most successful teams that is up a few years ago, has been down ever since, but is recently beginning to rise from the ashes like the Phoenix all the way to victory lane. Let's get into all that went down at Richmond yesterday. Number one, Chris Buescher, having a really solid year, punches his ticket to the playoffs with a win at Richmond Raceway yesterday in a thrilling, 3-lap dash to the finish after a late yellow, holding off Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, Joey Logano, and Ryan Preece to win the Cookout 400 yesterday. Chris Buescher started, again, deep in the field. He started in the 26th spot. They didn't qualify well, but they felt like based off prices, they would have a relatively good car on speed. And remember last year, Chris Buescher was nearly close to winning this race because he was coming with those fresh tires, but ultimately stalled out late and got passed by Christopher Bell, but ultimately they both finished behind Kevin Harvick. But Chris Buescher showed that last year's run in this race last year, although it was probably a different month, was no slouch. He came moving through the field nice and slowly, and by the time he got to stage 2, he found himself inside the top 10 in one of the fastest cars. Then in the final stage, Buescher started progressively moving himself up to the field and then took the lead in the early portion of the final stage and seemed to have a really good race car. He benefited on the green flag pit stops where he was able to take the lead fully and start to run away with the thing. He did hit a little bit of lap traffic towards the end of the race, but he seemed to hold his ground. Besides, he was about 6 seconds ahead of second place. Nobody was going to catch him. Until, with 8 laps to go, Daniel Suarez got spun off of turn 4 from the front bumper of Noah Gragson, who got a little loose, and that brought it a yellow. And at that time, Chris Buescher and Scott Grace were going, oh no, we got to come to pit road and we got to execute. We got to have a nice pit stop, no mistakes, no speeding, no removing equipment, none of that. And guess what? They didn't have any of those problems. They came down pit road. They got their tires in fuel like everyone else did. They came off pit road first. The other thing to keep in mind about Buescher and how he would fare to win this race, he needed to have a good restart, and he did just that. But that also is because Denny Hamlin on the outside kind of spun the tires, and even if he jumped the 17 car before they got out of the restart box, he could have been penalized for that. But Buescher got a good restart and was able to drive away when everyone behind him started running 3 wide for second place. At that time, I knew it was game over, and Buescher was on his way to win. And he picked up Roush Fenway's Keselowski Racing, I want to put that into words, their first win at this track since Carl Edwards won in 2013. And if y'all remember that race, it was Spingate. But it's the first one for the 17 team at Richmond since Matt Kenseth did it in the fall of 2002. But Chris Buescher has had a very good year. The whole RFK and organization in general has had a much improved year. If you remember the last couple years, they have been, I don't want to go too negative and say down in the dumps, but they were not living up to their expectations as an organization, a team that has been known for winning championships. They've been in a rut really ever since Matt Kenseth left to go to Joe Gibbs Racing, since Greg Biffle started to fade as being one of the top drivers that could probably contend for a championship. And when they lost Carl Edwards at the end of the 2014 season, I knew things were not going well for the organization. Then they brought Chris Buescher onto the team after a stint with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Despite 2 wins didn't work out. They brought Buescher onto the team in 2020, and Buescher had a relatively good season for the most part, but it was still a ways to go for him and the team. They had a rough 2021. His teammate at the time was Ryan Newman, but he wasn't really doing a whole lot, and then he disappeared after 2021, and then they brought Brad Keselowski on in 2022, not only drive the 6 car, but took a minority ownership into the team and be an owner with Jack Roush and John Henry, who owns Fenway Park in the Boston Red Sox. That's where the name Fenway comes in right there. But last year, the team was still trying to find its way, particularly with the 6 team. Buescher, however, was doing a good job. He didn't make the playoffs, but when we got to the 3rd race of the playoffs last year, he upset everybody in that race by winning the night race at Bristol, holding off Chase Elliott and everybody else behind him that needed to win to get in if they were below the cutoff line, particularly Kevin Harvick. But Buescher last year showed that he was building RFK in the right direction. I mean, in general, the RFK cars, they got better at the end of last year when they both missed the playoffs. They were starting to run well. And this year, ever since Daytona, even despite their rough run of the Clash where neither of them made the final main event, they have been very good ever since. Both cars have done well, and Buescher has done very well for himself this year. And now he's in the playoffs, and with that night race at Bristol in the playoffs, There's a possibility, and I'm going on a limb here to think that Chris Buescher could be the underdog that can maybe put a run at these guys in the playoffs. We'll see what happens, but the most important thing is that he's now in the playoffs, and for a guy that's never really been a big fan of Richmond in the past, he certainly likes it now, and he's in the playoffs. So kudos to Chris Buescher and Scott Graves for what has been a very much improved 2023 year and winning yesterday at Richmond. Number 2, BK. Brad Keselowski, very strong yesterday and looked to have the car to beat until he had a late race miscue during green flag pit stops. Like Buescher, Brad Keselowski also showed speed yesterday, and he has also had a much improved year from the disaster that was last year, particularly that big point penalty after the Atlanta race, not really performing up to expectations until the final 10 races when they were both out of the playoffs. He started to run better as well. But this year, Keselowski has been very, very good in general, running up front a lot of these races. Nearly won Atlanta until he got passed in the last lap by Joey Logano. But this race, he was also very, very good. And they were really good here in the spring race as well. Ran top 10 for the most part. But this time they were a winning team. They had a car yesterday to win the race. They were so good at the beginning of stage 2 when they took the lead from Bubba Wallace. And Keselowski looked like the car was untouchable. He won stage 2, and stage 3 looked like it was his race to lose. But one of the green flag pit stops, particularly the one that we got to with about under 100 laps to go, or maybe before 100 laps to go, he came in a little too hot into the box, and by that, he didn't have a good angle into the box, and the back tires were hanging out. They were able to commit their pit stop because NASCAR says as long as your right front tire's not touching the box, you're the white line, you're fine. So Keselowski proceeded with his pit stop, but unfortunately, that angle cost him a lot of time, and ultimately he fell back through the field, and all he could muster at the end of the day was a 6th place finish. Still, it's a good result, and he's obviously very happy to see his teammate and driver win the race, putting RFK back in victory lane. But I think Keselowski, at the same time, he would have loved it if it was himself in victory lane. But nonetheless, you got to be happy as a teammate and an owner to see your driver and / teammate get into victory lane and win for an organization that's building themselves back up. And I think they're building themselves back up a little quicker than I think we would have expected. I thought this would probably be at least a 2.5 year project to try to get this team back up to where they are supposed to have been when they were in the early 2000s and even early 2010s, winning races, competing for championships. But they're heading in the right direction, and Brad Keselowski has been a part of that, especially with his experience as an owner, because he owned a truck team for quite a while, and then he shut it down for 2017. But now that he has an ownership in this NASCAR Cup team with Jack Roush and John Henry, they're building themselves back up, and he had himself a good run yesterday. And points-wise, still looking very solid. Pending we have 3 new winners down the road, and none of them are Brad Keselowski. He should be just fine to make the playoffs. Now, I think he's going to need to probably win a race if he wants to make a deeper push with some bonus points. But still, what he has done this year and what he did yesterday, despite the late race miscue with his angle onto pit road during green flag stops, he had a very good run yesterday. So good job to Brad Keselowski and the 6th team and the whole RFK organization. They've done a great job this year. Number 3, 2311, strong at the start, faded at the very end. Both the cars were very, very good yesterday. Starting with Tyler Reddick, who got the pole for yesterday's race and led his first laps at Richmond, the first 70 laps to be exact. In stage 1, he looked like he had the car to beat because he had like a 4.5 second lead by the time he got to the end of that stage. Then in stage 2, he got passed for the lead, but still remained inside the top 5. And in the final stage, was starting to put a little bit of heat into those RFK cars and Denny Hamlin towards the end of the final stage. But when we had green flag pit stops, the final round of green flag stops, Tyler Reddick made a mistake. When he came to pit road, he touched the orange box at the entrance to pit road, and that is a commitment line violation. NASCAR got him for that. He had to serve a pass-through penalty and pretty much took him out of equation for the victory. And when he was stuck back there, he said, "My car is fast, but I can't seem to pass at all." And this has been pretty much their Achilles heel, really, in recent weeks. They've had the speed in their cars. If you think back to Nashville, they had one of the top cars that I think could have contended with Ross Chastain and Martin Truex Jr. and Denny Hamlin for the victory. However, they had that loose wheel and ultimately lost it coming back to pit road, lost the wheel, and pretty much took him out of the hunt. This has been like their Achilles heel. They've had good race cars, but they're not executing when it matters the most. If you want to win races and want to be a title contender, you have to execute. And they didn't do that at the end of the race yesterday. They've got to work on that. If they can eliminate the mistakes on pit road, on the racetrack, this team can win more races and be a championship threat in these playoffs. But they got to limit these mistakes. And once he lost that track position after that penalty, it didn't get better for him. He fell a lap down. He was one of the cars that took the away run when that late race yellow occurred, and ultimately came away with a 16th place finish. It's disappointing considering that they had much more than that yesterday. As for his teammate Bubba Wallace, also very strong at the start, running in the top 3, then took the lead from his teammate at the start of stage 2, and it seemed like he was the guy to beat. He had a good race car. But then when Brad Keselowski took the lead, Bubba still remained in the top 5, but it didn't seem like he had the speed like he did at the start of the second stage. And we got to the final stage, he started to fade a little further through the field because I think on the longer runs and the track was beginning to warm up a little too much than it was early in the race. It was not helping Bubba's car at all, and he faded outside the top 10. At the end of the day, he came away with a 12th place finish. So it was disappointing considering, like his teammate, that he had the speed probably to win the race. But there is a positive to take away from this. Actually, 2 of them. One of them is they had speed in their cars. And the second, he gained a lot of points. Remember, was entering the race. He was 36 points above the cutoff line regarding the playoffs. At the end of the day, he's 54 above. Sitting fairly good, but you don't know what's going to happen in these next 4 races, whether someone else could win and it's not Bubba. But he did a good job yesterday accumulating as many points as possible and building the cushion because the guys he was racing entering the day, they did not have a good day at all yesterday. Michael McDowell struggled. Ty Gibbs, he was the only one that was kind of close, and he only finished a couple spots behind Bubba. But other than that, Gibbs was, behind him most of the day. AJ Allmendinger struggled, and Daniel Suarez, again, he was one of the cautions, but, he flat out sucked yesterday. That car was terrible. Absolutely terrible. Bubba was the big winner of the guys around that cutoff area that are still eligible for points. He gained the most points out of all those guys, and he's sitting in a relatively good spot, pending we don't get any new winners. They're below him in the playoffs, in the playoff standings down the road. He should be good to make the playoffs on points. A win would definitely help lock himself in, but he executed on points yesterday. You just wish you could have won a little more out of him considering the speed they had at the start of the race with their teammate Tyler Reddick. But what was certainly turning out to be a promising day for 2311 kind of turned into an average end of their race with fading based on pits handling and having miscues late. If they can eliminate these mistakes, this team, any one of these 2 drivers, could maybe make some noise in these playoffs. But they got to eliminate these mistakes. But they had speed yesterday. They just couldn't execute at the very end. Number 4. Top 5 for Ryan Preece. Yes, you heard me right. Ryan Preece finished in the 5th spot yesterday for Stewart-Haas Racing. The highest finishing Stewart-Haas car. That's kind of where we normally say Kevin Harvick's the highest finishing Stewart-Haas car. But at the end of the day, it was Ryan Preece. And this is a short track. And Preece, running up in those modifieds, has been known to run very well on tracks shorter than a mile. And he had that yesterday. He had a good race car. And it's been a down year for this race team, this 41 team in particular. And if you guys remember what happened to him last week, got spun out late in the race by Corey LaJoie, and if you have footage from the car sitting behind them on pit road, Preece ran over to Corey LaJoie and was not happy about that contact and started cursing him out and everything. But Preece, it's been a disappointing year for this guy who was tabbed to replace Cole Custer, who went back to Xfinity. Preece, felt like this was a good opportunity for him, but they haven't really lived up to expectations that what they thought like they could get from him this year. It's been really a big of a struggle. This is the best finish for this team this year. Their first top 5/top 10 of the season. I can't believe I'm saying that. Wait, I think they may have finished top 10 at the Phoenix race earlier this year. I do remember earlier in the year, Martinsville, they had one of the best cars, but when he got caught for speeding on pit road, they never recovered, and they only finished inside the top 15. For them to come out of there yesterday with a solid top 5 run, that's very impressive. And it's also the first top 5, I can't believe I saw this stat, it's the first top 5 of the 41 car since they won that Kentucky race a few years ago with Cole Custer. I can't believe that. I'm shocked by that stat. But it was a good run for Ryan Preece and the 41 team to build morale up. And hopefully this could lead to better results down the road for this organization. And number 5, Richmond yesterday with tire strategy and managing your tires and the action in general. I felt like we had an above average Richmond race yesterday. Obviously, when you have these long green flag runs, and we had a ton of them yesterday, that basically opened the doors for guys to extend the stint if they wanted to, based on wanting to maybe try to get some track position and beat some guys late when they come to pit road, or some guys pitted earlier in the stint of the race because they were not really pleased with their cars and they needed tires because they said they were fading fast. You see a lot of that in Richmond over the last couple of years. Guys will short pit versus guys that will extend the stint a little bit longer before they come down to pit road. We saw a lot of that yesterday. Like Martin Truex Jr. had a bad start to the race, nearly got lapped, but he extended the stint in stage 2 and was able to stay out a little bit longer, came in guys' tires, and then drove his way back up to the top 15 and guys' lap back and was able to capitalize that into a top 10 at the end of the day. So some guys were able to benefit from doing shorter stints versus longer stints, or longer stints versus shorter stints. That's what happens now with this Richmond that we've got. And basically, you can run multiple grooves, the bottom, middle, high groove, because I remember many years ago, you'd see guys pretty much just flat out run the bottom because that was the place to be. You did not want to be up there on the top, especially no matter how good or how bad your tires were. But now with the track being worn out and basically with us not really running under the lights, it's kind of put a little bit of an interesting aspect into these races during the daytime at Richmond with these tire management. I felt like we did have some passing yesterday and some good battles out there. It was definitely fun. Obviously, still trying to work out the short tracks this year. We did a test today, by the way, with the upgrades that they're trying to bring to the short track car. We'll see if we decide to put them on the track in the coming weeks at a road course and obviously a short track and see if they work. But I felt like we did have a good race this weekend at Richmond Raceway. I felt like maybe it was a little bit better than the one that we had earlier this spring. But again, tire management was definitely one of the factors to this race yesterday. And if you also had a good race car, you were sitting pretty. If you didn't, you were in for a long, long day yesterday. And a lot of those guys did not have good days. But some of them, like, of course, our winner, Chris Buescher, are able to come out of there with good results. Or if you're in Chris Buescher's shoes, the victory yesterday. I do feel like that Richmond can still be a relatively good short track. Many years ago, it was like one of the, other than Bristol, one of the capitals of, short track racing, especially considering it was run a Saturday night, but kind of faded since then. But I felt like we had ourselves a good showing in yesterday's race at Richmond Raceway in the daytime. Now, we're off to the Irish Hills of Michigan, where speed is going to be a big benefactor to try to win the race. Last year, we saw Kevin Harvick punch his ticket to the playoffs by winning at Michigan, a track where he's done very well at the last few times we've been there. He would like to get that win and lock himself in the playoffs. And of course, he's sitting good as far as the points go right now, but he'd love to get another win in his final season. He's very good at this track, and I feel like he'll be one of the factors in this race. We saw Bubba Wallace finish runner-up last year, and if he brings that same speed this time around, he can maybe make up for the one that he felt like slipped through his fingers last year. But we also have Brad Keselowski that has never won at his home track before. Can he do it this weekend? We shall see. It'll be a very interesting race to see who comes out on top at Michigan, who will be fast. Will it be the Fords with Stuart Haas or Team Penske? Will it be the Chevrolets with Hendrick or Richard Childress Racing? Or will it possibly maybe be any of the Toyotas from 2311 or Joe Gibbs Racing? Or possibly a team that just won this weekend that's been very successful at Michigan in the past, RFK. Will they come out on top? We shall see. It'll be a very fast race next weekend. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Stay cool, please. It's so hot outside. Subscribe, like, and congratulations to Chris Buescher and the 17 team on their win at Richmond yesterday. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing.